Well, we're going to continue with our study of Aristotle. I want you to imagine with me that the whole world was one long chain of dominoes, one after the other. It's always fascinating to watch those chains of dominoes falling. It goes down one side and up another, and then all of a sudden it goes down three sides at the same time. But the question is, what is it that makes them fall? It takes a force from outside the domino system, and something must provide the initial momentum that makes the first domino to topple on the next domino, to topple on the next, and so on until the last one falls. Aristotle called that the prime mover, the first force which itself cannot be forced. For Aristotle, this causes a tension between physics and metaphysics, the side that goes beyond the physical, but which is linked with physics. The need for a being beyond the physical world, the one who sets in motion, a being who exists but is separate. He's the prime mover. The God is beyond motion himself. Now, he's not a talking God. He's a God who remains without real contact with us. Um, he's not a personal God or a theistic God. He's more of an initial power, an arche, a beginning or a beginner, which thinks and which draws our desire towards it as we aspire to approach it. So our movement comes out of the love that this prime mover inspires in us, a living movement that is the first thought and to which our thought and our desire continually draws us. Now, this conception of the divine is not just a being, but rather it is being itself. And all that is borrows its being from him. Then he's the ontological foundation of the universe and is therefore the efficient cause of all that is. But he is that eternally. For in Aristotle's view, the physical universe has no beginning and no end. Thus, we have no creation myth in Aristotle, as we do in Plato in his Timaeus. His views of God find a frame of reference in notions like the one and the many, discernible in the early writings of Anaximander and Heraclitus, Empedocles, and Plato. But at the base of the Aristotelian universe is this abstruse concept of the unmoved mover. Julian Marias attempts an explanation of the concept. The God of Aristotle, he says, is the absolute moment of the world. His mission is to make motion possible, and even more, to make possible the oneness of motion. It is he, then, who makes there be a universe. But God is not a creator. This idea, which will mark the deep difference between the Hellenic and Christian thinking, is foreign to Greek thought. The Aristotelian God is the absolutely self sufficient entity, and therefore the highest entity. All of Aristotle's philosophy culminates in this theory. So, are you confused? You find this confusing? Well, that's okay. Let's just agree with Cicero that these are confusing ideas and hard to grasp, especially when we bring our modern minds to their ancient but different worldview. I say ancient, not primitive, but these people saw things in a different way than we do. But picking up from Marias, let's consider what he calls the deep difference between Hellenic and Christian theology. Now, I'm reading from Aristotle himself, from his metaphysics, it is clear then from what has been said that there is a substance which is eternal and unmovable and separate from sensible things. It has been shown that this substance cannot have any magnitude, but is without parts and indivisible. But it has also been shown that it is impassible and unalterable, for all the other changes are posterior to change of place, Aristotle says. Here's the point. Aristotle's unmoved mover is no more personal a god than Plato's notions of deity, called the One or the Absolute by the later Neoplatonists that we'll be talking about in the next lesson. But Bertrand Russell notes that in the metaphysics, Aristotle can walk a tension between monotheism and polytheism. Is that possible? Is it likely that there are many entities within the one divine entity? Listen to Russell. Astronomical considerations lead to the conclusion that there are either 47 or 55 unmoved movers. The relation of these to God is not made clear. Indeed, the natural interpretation would be that there are 47 or 55 gods, each one providing a different kind of astronomic motion. The entertainment of this kind of a theology should certainly highlight what Marias calls the deep difference between Hellenic and Christian thinking. This Greek way of thinking is not in any sense comparable with the Bible. Aristotle's work was largely lost to the West for centuries until it was reintroduced through Islam and Judaism. As inconsistent as Aristotle appears to us to be with Christianity, later Christian thinkers who met with Aristotelian thought through the Muslim and Judaic theology of the Middle Ages found in Aristotle an irresistible means of reconciling the distance between reason and faith and religion and science. Among Aristotle's greatest exponents during this early period of his reintroduction to the West were Albertus Magnus, and above all, his very brilliant student, Thomas Aquinas, who sought to reconcile Aristotle's philosophy with Christian thought. Essential to Aristotle is this notion of the prime mover and the distinction between pure form and matter. The first mover is pure form, the only exception in all the universe to the rule that all substance contains both form and matter. The prime mover is pure form. If there were a material component in his nature, or in its nature, I think better to call it then it would have some unrealized potentiality, and this would cause it to evolve into reality. It would then not be an unchanging prime mover. And to be a prime mover, it mustn't change. Similarly, the prime mover must not, according to Aristotle, be influenced in any way by the world. Otherwise, it will become the moved one and not the mover. This being must not, therefore, know the world, because to know is to be influenced in a certain way by the object of the knowledge, nor love the world, nor act in the world. So we can see that Aristotle's prime mover is very different from the biblical God. The biblical God is not only the final cause of the world, that for which the world exists, but also the efficient cause, the preceding force that pushes all things into existence. He's not only the logical beginning of the universe, but also its temporal beginning. And he knows and loves the world that he's created without endangering his absolute nature. This is possible because the world itself is an expression of his eternal thought. His mind contains a real content, which he freely reveals to human beings. But we will discover, on the other hand, that these Platonic and Aristotelian influences on Christian theology continue for a long time. Eventually, in theology, one must consider questions around whether God can change. Doesn't the Bible say, I change not? I guess that means God is static, and of course he's perfect. But then how can he feel? Or how does he interact with changeable humanity and a changeable universe? Well, already we begin to see how philosophy and our notion of God get mixed up sometimes, and how philosophy can enlighten, but also challenge our biblical ideas. In the next session, we're going to see how Plato and Aristotle go on to have an impact on how Christianity developed.